My friends, in relationships, one of the most painful things that can happen is when someone takes you for granted. Whether it's a partner, a friend, or even a colleague, the feeling of being overlooked, undervalued, or ignored can leave you questioning your own worth. But here's the truth. You don't have to beg for respect. You don't have to constantly remind someone of your value. The first step in teaching someone the true cost of taking you for granted is realizing that you are worthy of being treated with kindness, respect, and appreciation. If you don't believe this yourself, no one else will. The key to this starts with understanding your own value. When you know what you bring to the table, whether it's your love, your time, your effort, or your emotional support, you will stop tolerating the behavior that undermines it. It all starts with you. If you constantly give without receiving, if you let someone take your presence for granted, you're sending a message to yourself that your worth is up for negotiation. It's not. Your value is inherent. Once you truly believe that, your actions will begin to reflect this truth, and others will start to recognize it too. There's a massive difference between setting a standard and issuing an ultimatum. One is powerful, the other is performative. One shows self-respect, the other begs for change. If you want someone to stop taking you for granted, you have to stop treating your standards like they're negotiable. You don't teach someone how to treat you by telling them over and over again how they should behave. You show them by what you allow, what you tolerate, and ultimately what you choose to walk away from. Standards are not things you shout in frustration. They're quiet, confident expectations that you live by, whether someone meets them or not. Think of a standard like a dress code. You don't walk into a high-end restaurant in flip-flops and demand to be seated. You either meet the standard or you find somewhere else to eat. That's how your love life should work too. If someone wants access to your time, your energy, your affection, they should meet the emotional dress code. Respect, effort, consideration. If they don't get the table. Here's where people get stuck. They confuse ultimatums for boundaries. An ultimatum sounds like, if you don't start treating me better, I'm leaving. That's not power. That's pleading, because it assumes they already don't value you, and now you're trying to scare them into doing so. It puts the power in their hands. They get to decide whether you're bluffing or not. A standard, on the other hand, says nothing. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't scream. It simply acts. It says, this is what I accept. Anything less, I disengage. That silence speaks louder than any demand ever could. When someone starts taking you for granted, it's usually because they've stopped believing there's a cost to doing so. They know you'll stay. They know you'll forgive. They know you'll wait. So they become lazy, complacent, even indifferent. Why should they work for something they believe they already own? Your job isn't to lecture them into valuing you. It's to shift the dynamic, to interrupt the pattern. That might mean pulling back, saying no, spending your time elsewhere, not to punish, but to protect your energy, not to manipulate, but to mirror what you're receiving. When your standards remain strong, even when it's hard, even when it's uncomfortable, you send a clear message. Access to you is a privilege, not a guarantee. Here's what happens when you get this right. One of two things. Either he steps up because he realizes what he's about to lose, or he steps out because he never intended to match your standard in the first place. Either way, you win, because you're no longer stuck in the exhausting cycle of over-explaining, over-giving, and under-receiving. You're no longer trying to convince someone of your worth. You're living it. And that shift, that decision to lead with standards, not ultimatums, that's the moment everything changes. So the next time you feel taken for granted, don't reach for the words, reach for the actions, and ask yourself, not how do I make him see my worth, but how do I start honoring it myself? Because the moment you do, anyone who's not ready to meet you there will fall away. And the ones who are, they won't need a speech. They'll just show up consistently. When someone starts taking you for granted, it's easy to get caught in the trap of thinking that more of your presence, your attention, or your love will fix the situation. You might think, if I just keep giving more, they'll realize what they have. But the opposite is often true. When someone becomes too comfortable, they stop appreciating what they have because they assume it will always be there no matter what. The key to teaching them the cost of taking you for granted is realizing that sometimes the most powerful way to remind someone of your value is by showing them what life is like without you. This isn't about playing games or being manipulative. It's about creating enough space for them to feel the absence of something they've stopped fully appreciating. Think about it. Absence creates desire. When something is always available, it loses its significance. We take things for granted because we don't fear losing them. But when you create distance, whether physically or emotionally, you force the other person to confront the possibility of losing you. This absence doesn't have to be extreme or permanent. It could be as simple as stepping back from constant communication, not always being available when they call, or not immediately dropping everything for them when they need you. The goal isn't to punish them, but to offer a reminder that your presence is something that should be earned and valued, not assumed. You teach others how to treat you by how you handle your own absence. If you constantly make yourself available, constantly give more of yourself even when they've stopped meeting you halfway, you're essentially training them to think that your time, your attention, and your love are free. But when you remove that availability, you send a message that says, I'm not a constant fixture in your life just because I've always been here. You'll need to put in effort to keep me here. It's not about a dramatic exit. It's about recognizing that your presence is valuable and doesn't need to be taken for granted. It's easy to become afraid of pulling back. We think that if we stop giving, the person will walk away. We fear that if we stop being constantly available, we'll lose them. But in reality, it's often the opposite. When you create that space, you give the other person an opportunity to recognize the role you play in their life. The time you spend apart allows them to reflect on the connection you share, and often they'll realize that they've been taking you for granted. They'll miss the support, the love, and the attention you offered so freely. And when they return, and they likely will, they'll return with a newfound appreciation for what you bring to the table. Distance doesn't just affect the other person, it also serves as a reflection of your own self-worth. When you pull back, you're saying, I'm worthy of effort, I'm worthy of attention, I'm worthy of being prioritized. And when you start treating yourself as someone who deserves to be valued, you begin to demand that others do the same. The beauty of this is that it's not about playing a game or manipulating anyone. It's simply about respecting your own time, your own energy, and your own value. When you teach someone that your presence is something they could lose, it forces them to reevaluate their actions. Instead of overcompensating by being constantly available or giving more to someone who isn't showing the same effort, consider the power of absence. It's not a punishment, it's a healthy reminder. Your time is precious and your emotional energy is sacred. When someone gets used to your presence, it's not about withdrawing for the sake of making them feel guilty. It's about showing them that what they take for granted is something they could lose. And sometimes that reminder is all it takes to snap them out of their complacency and make them realize what they truly have before it's gone. Consistency is one of the most powerful tools you have when it comes to teaching someone the cost of taking you for granted. The reason consistency is so effective is that it leaves no room for confusion. It's not about threatening or manipulating someone into respecting you. It's about showing up for yourself in a way that makes your boundaries and expectations clear. If you constantly vacillate between being strong in your standards and giving in to someone's behavior when they push, you dilute your own power. The mixed messages leave the door open for them to continue testing the boundaries. And before long, they won't take your boundaries seriously because they know you'll bend when it gets uncomfortable. When you set a boundary or standard, you must hold it steady, regardless of how the other person reacts. This means that even when they push back or try to test you, you don't engage in emotional back and forth. You don't negotiate your self-respect. You don't let their behavior dictate how you respond. Instead, you maintain your stance and consistently show that you value yourself enough not to compromise on your boundaries. If someone truly values you, they will respect your consistency. They will see that you're not a person to be taken for granted. And over time, They'll adjust to meet the expectations you've set because they understand that you won't tolerate anything less. Consistency doesn't just mean sticking to your boundaries. It means maintaining your own sense of self-worth, regardless of what's happening around you. When you're consistent in how you show up, in how you treat yourself and others, you make it clear that you aren't a placeholder in someone else's life. You aren't there simply to be convenient when it's easy or to accept scraps of attention. You are the standard of how you want to be treated, and your behavior reflects that. Every time you show up for yourself in this way, it reinforces the idea that your presence and your time are valuable. A lack of consistency creates confusion. If one day you're okay with being overlooked or underappreciated, but the next day you demand respect, the other person doesn't have a clear understanding of where they stand. This inconsistency doesn't force them to change. It keeps them in the cycle of complacency, where they don't need to put in effort because they know you'll eventually give in. But when your actions match your words, when your boundaries are steady, when your standards are firm and clear, you create a framework within which the other person can either rise to meet your expectations or face the consequences of not doing so. Consistency also requires that you stay true to yourself, regardless of how the other person reacts. It's not about seeking validation from them or trying to make them see your value. It's about respecting yourself enough not to be swayed by momentary emotions or temporary circumstances. It means not allowing frustration, anger, or fear to override your boundary. It's easy to slip into old patterns of overcompensating when you feel emotionally vulnerable, but that's when you need consistency the most. By sticking to your standards consistently, even when it's hard, you reinforce your sense of self-worth. And in doing so, you show the other person that you won't compromise on your own needs and desires. You won't settle for less than what you deserve. And that's the most attractive, empowering message you can send. When you're consistent, you create a space where the other person has to take responsibility for their actions. There's no longer room for excuses or manipulation. They understand that your boundaries are not negotiable. And if they want to be in your life, they will have to respect them. This consistency gives them the opportunity to either step up or step out. But either way, you're not left feeling drained, disrespected, or undervalued. You've taken control of the situation, and doing so, you've set the tone for how you deserve to be treated. Consistency allows you to build the life you want. A life where you are valued for who you are, not what you give. It teaches the people around you that your presence is precious and that they need to show up with the same respect, care, and effort you show to yourself. By staying consistent in your standards and behavior, you make it clear that you will not settle for anything less than what you deserve. It's the best way to teach someone the real cost of taking you for granted. When it comes to teaching someone the cost of taking you for granted, one of the most effective things you can do is stop arguing for your worth. Too often we find ourselves in situations where we feel the need to explain, justify, or prove our value to others. We get into long emotional debates about why we deserve respect or attention. We lay out all the reasons why we are worthy of love, kindness, or effort. And while this may seem like the right approach, it rarely works in the long run. Why? Because when you find yourself repeatedly arguing for your worth, it only highlights a lack of belief in your own value. You are essentially asking someone to see something that they may not be ready or willing to acknowledge. The more you argue, the more it becomes about convincing them rather than showing them the truth through your actions. Whether personal or professional, your worth should be evident in how you carry yourself, how you treat others, and how you allow others to treat you. Your value doesn't need to be explained in lengthy speeches or emotional pleas. It should be demonstrated through consistency, through boundaries, and through the way you hold yourself. If someone can't see or appreciate your worth, then you need to stop wasting energy trying to make them. Arguing for your worth places the focus on convincing someone else to value you, but the real power comes from knowing your own worth and allowing others to recognize it through your actions. When you stop explaining yourself and start demonstrating your worth, you remove all the unnecessary emotional labor from the equation. You stop making your value conditional on the opinions of others. Instead, you start living in a way that reflects your own self-respect. You stop chasing validation and start setting standards that others must meet in order to remain in your life. This shift is powerful because it doesn't rely on the other person's approval to feel secure in your own self-worth. Your worth is not up for negotiation, and it's not something that needs to be constantly proved. It's intrinsic, and it's evident in the way you live your life. By showing rather than telling, you teach others that your value is not something that needs to be earned through words. It's something that's shown through the way you carry yourself, through the boundaries you set, and through the choices you make. When you allow your actions to speak louder than your words, you send a message that says, this is who I am, and if you want to be a part of my life, you need to recognize this. And when you stop begging for acknowledgement or trying to convince others of your worth, you stop giving them the power to dictate how much you're worth. This approach also saves you from the emotional exhaustion that comes with trying to justify your existence in someone else's life. Constantly trying to prove yourself can leave you feeling depleted, frustrated, and unappreciated. But when you live in alignment with your own values and standards, you begin to attract people who recognize and appreciate your worth without needing to be convinced. You don't have to explain why you deserve kindness, respect, or love, because your behavior and the way you carry yourself naturally attracts these things. People who truly value you won't need a reason to give you the respect and effort you deserve. They'll give it because they feel your value in the way you show up. What's powerful about this shift is that it eliminates the need for emotional drama and conflict. Instead of wasting time in endless arguments about why you deserve better treatment, you simply show what happens when your needs aren't met. You create distance, you create space, and you protect your peace. And in doing so, you allow the other person to either rise to the occasion or walk away. Either way, you win, because you've stopped putting yourself in a position where you have to justify your worth. The key is in understanding that your worth doesn't need to be earned through constant explanations, justifications, or begging for recognition. Your worth is inherent. It's built into who you are. And the moment you realize that you don't need to argue for it, that you simply need to live it, everything changes. You stop chasing after people who don't value you and start attracting those who recognize your worth right away, without any need for explanation. Silence can be one of the most powerful tools at your disposal when you're trying to teach someone the cost of taking you for granted. Many people mistakenly believe that silence is a form of punishment, a way of withholding affection or attention to make someone feel guilty. But in reality, silence is not about seeking revenge or forcing someone to feel bad about their actions. It's about creating space for reflection. It's about giving both you and the other person the chance to pause and evaluate the situation without the noise of constant interaction clouding your judgment or theirs. When you pull back and stop engaging in the same patterns of behavior, you force them to confront their own actions rather than letting them off the hook with more excuses or explanations. It's easy to get caught in the cycle of trying to explain, justify, or argue your feelings. When you feel overlooked or disrespected, your natural instinct may be to talk it out, to make the other person understand why you're hurt, why their behavior is unacceptable. But this often results in frustration, with the conversation going in circles and no real change occurring. By choosing silence instead of engaging in this emotional back and forth, you break the cycle. You stop enabling the behavior that has left you feeling taken for granted. Silence forces the other person to reflect on their actions, not to explain them away or deflect. It gives them the opportunity to recognize the impact of their behavior without you needing to spell it out for them. Silence also allows you to reclaim your power. Often, when we're in situations where we feel disrespected, we get caught up in the need to prove a point or be heard. We feel that if we can just communicate our feelings clearly enough, the other person will change. But what we forget in these moments is that our power lies not in pleading for validation, but in holding our ground and protecting our peace. When you choose silence, you are asserting your boundaries without needing to engage in a dramatic confrontation. You are saying, this is not acceptable and I don't need to justify my feelings. It's a powerful form of self-respect that can't be undermined by words or emotions. Another benefit of silence is that it removes the temptation to engage in manipulative behaviors. Sometimes when we feel taken for granted, we want to make the other person feel guilty. We might try to use guilt, frustration, or anger to force them to see our worth. But that tactic rarely works because it's rooted in emotional manipulation and it rarely leads to real change. Silence, on the other hand, is a direct reflection of your self-respect. You don't need to guilt someone into recognizing your value. You simply remove yourself from situations where that value is not being acknowledged. It's not about punishing them, but about prioritizing your own well-being and refusing to stay in a situation where you are not valued. Silence creates space for growth and introspection, not only for the other person, but also for yourself. When you stop reacting emotionally and start observing, you can evaluate the situation with a clearer mind. You get to assess whether this person truly values you or if they have been taking you for granted without realizing it. It allows you to step back from the immediate emotional response and decide what's best for you, whether it's giving the other person a chance to come around or walking away altogether. This reflective space also gives you the time to reconnect with yourself, to restore your own sense of self-worth, and to reevaluate the relationship dynamics without the distraction of constant interaction. Silence creates a kind of emotional distance that can be incredibly revealing. Sometimes we don't realize how much we've been tolerating until we create space between ourselves and the situation. When we withdraw emotionally, we allow ourselves to step out of the patterns of overcompensating and people-pleasing. In that space, we start to recognize how much we've been giving without receiving in return. It's only through silence that you may come to realize how much you've been undervaluing your own needs in the hope of getting someone else to see your worth. This newfound awareness can help you make decisions that are healthier for you in the long run, whether that means setting stronger boundaries, walking away from a toxic situation, or choosing to let go of someone who has consistently taken you for granted. Silence is a strategy that forces both you and the other person to face reality. It's not about punishing them. It's about teaching them and yourself that your presence, your love, and your time are not something to be taken lightly. When you stop chasing, stop pleading, and stop explaining, you make it clear that you expect to be treated with respect. And sometimes that quiet action speaks volumes more than any words ever could. When you're trying to teach someone the cost of taking you for granted, it's essential to remember that growth isn't about seeking revenge or trying to prove a point. It's about cultivating self-respect and holding yourself to a higher standard, regardless of the other person's behavior. Many people fall into the trap of believing that they need to get back at someone for hurting them or taking them for granted. They might feel an urge to get even, to show the other person how wrong they were, or to make them regret their actions. But this approach only keeps you emotionally tied to the person who has disrespected you, often leaving you feeling just as drained, hurt, or undervalued as before. True growth comes from breaking free from that cycle and focusing on yourself, your healing, your peace, and your sense of self-worth. Self-respect means making choices that honor your needs and your boundaries without relying on someone else's recognition or validation. When you allow someone to take you for granted, you're essentially telling yourself that you are not worthy of respect. But when you decide that you won't tolerate that behavior, you're affirming to yourself that you deserve better. This decision doesn't require the other person to acknowledge it or apologize. It doesn't require revenge or a dramatic confrontation. It simply requires you to walk away from behaviors that no longer serve you, to protect your emotional energy, and to prioritize your well-being over someone else's inability to treat you with care. That's the kind of growth that lasts. It's the growth that builds a stronger sense of self and a deeper understanding of what you will and will not tolerate in your life. When you focus on growth in this way, you create a powerful shift in how you view yourself and how others view you. When you stop seeking revenge, you stop giving the other person control over your emotions. You reclaim your power by choosing to act in alignment with your own value. Instead of wasting energy on anger or resentment, you focus on becoming the best version of yourself emotionally, mentally, and even physically. This growth shifts the dynamic in your relationships as people are drawn to your strength, your confidence, and your clear sense of self-worth. You no longer need to convince anyone that you deserve to be treated with respect. Your actions will speak for themselves. The simple act of walking away from someone who takes you for granted will show them exactly what it costs to lose your presence in their life. When you shift your focus from seeking revenge to focusing on your own growth, you give yourself the space to heal. Often, when we're in situations where we're not being valued, we become emotionally stuck. We continue to rehash old wounds, trying to figure out what went wrong or how to make the other person see our worth. This emotional stagnation prevents us from moving forward and healing. But when you stop dwelling on the past and focus on your own growth, you release the grip the situation has over you. You let go of the resentment and the need for validation, allowing yourself to heal and move on. Growth becomes the antidote to the hurt, and instead of being defined by someone else's treatment of you, you start defining yourself by how you choose to move forward with dignity and grace. Focusing on your own growth enables you to learn important lessons about yourself and what you need in future relationships. The experiences of being taken for granted are never easy, but they can teach us valuable insights about our own behaviors, patterns, and expectations. Through self-reflection, you can identify where you might have been tolerating less than you deserve, where you've allowed yourself to stay in situations for too long, or where you've failed to assert your boundaries. This awareness is key to personal growth because it helps you recognize the areas where you need to change in order to create healthier relationships moving forward. By learning from the past without dwelling on it, you transform that experience into a tool for your personal development. Growth isn't about getting revenge or teaching someone a lesson. It's about teaching yourself that you are worthy of love, respect, and kindness. It's about learning to walk away from situations that don't align with your values so you can make room for the relationships that truly deserve your time and energy. When you stop trying to prove your worth to others and start demonstrating it to yourself, you attract the kind of people who will naturally respect you and your boundaries. In the end, the greatest lesson you can teach someone who takes you for granted is that you won't settle for anything less than the respect and love you know you deserve. And that lesson isn't about revenge. It's about self-respect and the quiet strength that comes from choosing to prioritize your own growth. In conclusion, teaching someone the cost of taking you for granted is not about seeking revenge, manipulating the situation, or trying to prove a point. It's about empowering yourself, establishing boundaries, and creating space for personal growth. It's about recognizing your own value and living in a way that reflects that understanding. When you stop pleading for validation and instead demonstrate through your actions that you are worthy of respect, you begin to shift the dynamic of your relationship. Silence, consistency, and self-respect become the tools that reinforce your worth, showing others that your presence is not to be taken lightly. By focusing on your growth and well-being, you not only protect yourself from emotional harm, but you also attract the people who truly value you for who you are, not just what you give. It's not about punishing anyone, but about removing yourself from situations where you are not appreciated. In doing so, you set a powerful example of self-love and strength. And in the end, the real lesson is not about teaching someone else. It's about teaching yourself that you deserve nothing less than the best. When you prioritize your own value, you create the space for a life filled with respect, love, and fulfillment.